Okay, that should be clear. Okay, yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Uh, we have the community call today. This is going to be a very short one, much shorter than usual, anyway. There is one key concept, an update to the protocol that we want to highlight and review and explain, and that's going to be the main purpose of the community call this week. So, that is something you might have heard of recently, which is proof of deposit. So we're going to explain what that is, why we're doing it, how it works, and some of the key points around it. As per usual, we have John here, and John is going to be walking us through what all of that means. How are you doing, John?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, Barter. I'm looking forward to explaining proof of deposit and whatever else people ask about.
Yeah, certainly. And there's going to be a few other things that we review as well. But yeah, first off, let's start with some of the key updates that are coming here to the protocol. We're going to explain why they're happening and what they're going to mean for all of the different participants that we have in the network, our benchmarkers, our innovators. Let's start with the key one. So, proof of deposit. What's going on with that? How does it work? What does it mean? And how is it going to change the way that the protocol functions?
Oh, good question. So, what proof of deposit is it's a mechanism which means that if you have a deposit of a certain number of TIG tokens in your benchmarker account, if you're a benchmarker, then having a deposit up to a certain level will mean that your mining will tend to be more efficient. So you could still sort of mine or benchmark without any deposit in your account. It would be somewhat less efficient. So you get fewer tokens for the amount of compute that you're deploying. But if you have a certain amount of deposit, then you will be mining sort of more efficiently. You'll be getting more tokens per sort of unit compute that you deploy. And specifically, the sort of optimal amount to have really reflects the size of miner that you are. So if say you're about let's say kind of you're a big miner, you might be sort of 5% of the compute on the TIG network. Then of all the deposit which is in the miners' accounts, you would look to have about 5% of that deposit. So your sort of fractions should match the size of the miner that you are. Big miners should aim to have a bigger deposit, and smaller miners will aim to have a smaller deposit in order to sort of mine optimally, as I said, to get the most tokens. Now, I suppose it just highlights this means that it doesn't mean to say that you have to purchase any TIG tokens, for example. That's not required. I mean, like a new benchmarker could come along and sort of mine for a period of time that would win some TIG tokens. You would hope, but then those ones would sort of stay in their account and be used for a deposit. So it wouldn't require any kind of purchase, but it would be something that you would look if you wanted to be the most competitive. You would look to sort of accumulate an amount of deposit in TIG tokens, which is sort of commensurate with your amount of compute that you're deploying to the network. So in that sense, it's quite a simple mechanism. The reason why we're introducing it is really because of the threat of botnets. So some of you might have realized that the innovation game is sort of readily quite mineable on things like sort of CPUs and GPUs, and these are the kinds of things which sort of sit around in the computers of often relatively unsophisticated people around the world, just sort of ordinary sort of mums and dads and people who have computers connected to the internet. And unfortunately, some sort of devious individuals kind of make a living out of spreading Trojans. I guess I don't know quite how they do it. Maybe send them out through emails or something, and then they try and hijack their computers to do crypto mining. I mean, this is sometimes they use it to sort of mine Monero or something like that. And basically, it's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to do that if you have this sort of deposit requirement, because it'll be a lot less of an attractive thing to do, and that's the reason why we are introducing it to the innovation game, because the innovation game ongoing. I mean, a lot of proofs of work move on to sort of ASICs ultimately, and therefore you don't really have a botnet problem, because ASICs just tend to be owned by sort of sophisticated people who secure their computers and don't have Trojans. But the thing is about the innovation game, because the algorithms are subject to sort of changing and being upgraded, then it's probably going to be ASICs are going to be less of a thing for less time. So that's it's more kind of, we have to sort of be more aware of that than most proof of work protocols do, and so that's the motivation for the future.
Yeah, excellent. And some additional context that I want to provide here. Worth very briefly going over how benchmarking rewards are currently calculated, just so people get an outline of how that's going to be changing once proof of deposit is going to be is introduced. So, as we know, people select what algorithms they want to be benchmarking. If those algorithms are efficient, solutions are found. There's also an imbalance penalty that factors in here. How does it all work, John?
Yeah, that's right. So, in fact, it's closely analogous to the way that it works currently with multiple proofs of work. So, at the moment, of course, we have four, soon to be five. And one way of looking at this deposit requirement is it's sort of, I mean, in many ways, it's analogy to having just an additional proof of work in the system. But of course, it's not a proof of work; it's a deposit. But again, if you're sort of out of balance, so say you've got sort of loads of excess deposit, but you're only kind of relatively small miner, that again would sort of just get cut off. It wouldn't count. And if you had sort of very little deposit, you would mine sort of less efficiently to get fewer tokens because of that, because it wasn't sort of matching up to the levels of your other sort of proofs of work, the number of solutions, qualifying solutions that you were finding. So it will really go into the formula, the same formula that's in the white paper, which is so-called kind of influence formula, I think we call it, and it's used to compute benchmarkers rewards. It's just an additional ingredient in there, and it serves as an incentive to hold a deposit if you're a benchmarker. And as I said, that sort of greatly mitigates the botnet threat. It doesn't completely eliminate it. The thing is, if you're a sort of a botnet, you're trying to attack the network, and obviously by definition you'd have to be a big botnet, and then you'd need a big deposit, right, in order to be sort of for the attack to be efficient.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of the logic of it, or the economics of it, is if maybe some kind of botnet attacker could acquire a big deposit, but then it's going to be a pretty dumb strategy for them to sort of attack TIG, because then the value of their deposit, which they had accumulated, might be subject to losing value. So it sort of creates an additional element of economic security to discourage bad actors or people who might rent botnets from messing with the innovation game.
Right on. So, in order to mine effectively, you're going to need to deposit some TIG in proportion to your share of network compute. Now, if we know, how big of a gain are you going to get when it comes to the efficacy of your compute?
So it's not so much of a gain. In fact, it will be more like you would be penalised for not having it.
Okay.
So yeah, and just to make it clear, we say you have to deposit it. I mean, you can deposit it, but you can also just accumulate it, right? Because I mean, it would be deposited, I guess, after you've accumulated it in your but by mining in one of your accounts. So it can just sort of grow there over time. Size of the penalty for having no deposit in there is, in fact, well, actually, so this is a parameter we haven't quite decided where to fix it yet. We don't want to sort of kind of make it too enormous, because we I guess we just wouldn't really want to make it coercive. Like, we want it to be possible for somebody who hasn't got any sort of TIG tokens to kind of basically accumulate some, even though they didn't have some, so they would be mining but somewhat less efficiently, and then they could sort of continue on sort of mining at the kind of optimal level. So we're not actually, that parameter is yet to be set, but it'll be I actually, I won't say, because otherwise if I say it's one value, some people might say, oh, you told me it would be this value and it will be somewhere other. We still haven't fixed that yet, but it will be substantial, that the penalty for people who were just sort of using compute with and didn't have any TIG tokens at all deposited in their benchmarker account, as it would need to be in order to provide the security benefits I mentioned.
Yeah, excellent. On top of the security benefits, are there going to be any other benefits for the protocol as a whole that you might want to go over, or is that really like sums it up?
So I would say that mainly sums it up. I mean, security benefit is the headline one. we would be looking to we would be hoping to on the road. This wouldn't be implemented initially, but on the roadmap there may be an option to sort of delegate deposit amounts. So for people who aren't benchmarkers, for example, or just have an excess of TIG tokens, and then if another benchmarker say they don't have sufficient TIG tokens, it might be that one kind of holder of TIG tokens can just say, okay, this deposit is sort of delegated over to this benchmarker's account. And the way that would work would be, there would be you wouldn't have to send it to your account or anything, so that would kind of risk them, not giving it you back, or and there'll be a kind of risk. It would never leave your account. It would just simply be that you would kind of signal that you were delegating to some other account. And so this would mean that, yeah, people who didn't have sufficient deposit maybe could get it from other people, and then there might be yeah, so that's sort of like basically makes it a little bit less constraining. But because that it's a bit more of a slightly more sort of complex feature, it probably won't be available sort of initially at launch.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And just thinking about what this means for miners practically, does this mean that smaller miners can potentially outperform bigger miners if they hold more TIG and deposit it?
Yeah, that's right. So say, I mean, as I said before, like a smaller miner will need a smaller amount of deposit. And if you're a small guy and you only have, let's say, 1% of the computing power of the biggest guy, well then in order to mine efficiently, the biggest guy is going to need 100 times more deposit than you. So, you might say 100 times more deposit is, a kind of a bit more of a sort of barrier to entry, a bit more of a tricky thing to accumulate. And therefore, if that bigger miner doesn't have all of that deposit, then, relatively speaking, at least the smaller guy would have an advantage. They would be more efficient. So, in that particular scenario, it would enable smaller miners to compete more effectively. I guess because smaller amounts of deposit are just sort of easier to acquire than large amounts.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. Okay. Oh, whoops. I navigated away from that tab. Okay. So one thing that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking here is what does this mean for new benchmarkers who haven't participated in TIG before and want to start coming in and providing hash power to the protocol? I mean, one of the obvious critiques here is that the bigger holders that can mine the most, they could potentially accumulate a disproportionate amount of power, and it becomes like a situation of the rich getting richer, and then we have a whole oligopoly at work. Like you said, delegated proof of stake could be a potential answer to this, but how are we thinking about it?
So the thing about the oligopoly, I mean, this is something that's quite famous in proof of stake. Things that about and it is a valid concern in proof of stake. So things that it remains, at least by my kind of definition, the way I see it, is that this is why we didn't call it staking or anything like that, because I don't really see it that way. So I in my view, the innovation game remains sort of entirely proof of work, and I'll explain why that is. So the kind of magic thing about proof of work is that um, you have significant costs in order to sort of mine and secure the network. And mining obviously enables you to sort of earn additional tokens. So the tokens that the miners get, because there's sort of competition. If there's some sort of profit to be had, the cost of mining is just lower than the value of the tokens that you're sort of getting through mining. Then of course, sort of more competitors come in. Everybody likes sort of a free money, a margin. So what tends to happen is it tends to the point whereby the costs of the miners sort of almost equal the value of the tokens that they're earning. And that's kind of seems a bit sort of hard on the miners, but really it's a positive thing because it means they have to sell almost all of the tokens just to cover their costs. And in fact, miners in fact often sell all of the tokens, not just almost all, and they just keep the margin. They hope that their costs, are slightly less than the money they get from the tokens. So the fact that all the tokens were being earned are being sold all the time, you might think, oh, this is bad, it's selling pressure. But actually, it's better because it means that the distribution is much better. So you get a sort of market determined distribution of people who own the tokens, because they're all being sold. Now contrast that with sort of proof of stake, the pure proof of stake. If you've got, I don't know, like a million ether or something like that, you'd probably be like a billionaire. But you could basically be a staker with a million ETH on a laptop at home. The computation requirements are negligible, so your costs are negligible, compared to the sort of vast, probably like millions of dollars a day or something that you would be earning through staking that and validating the network. What that means is that these people just accumulate and accumulate. They do not sell the tokens that they earn, because they don't have to. Whereas proof of work miners are forced sellers, and this is exactly the same in the innovation game, even after the deposit requirement is introduced. If you think about it, what are your costs? Like, you don't really have any costs associated with just holding a deposit, but you still have those costs associated with performing computational work, and they have to be covered by selling tokens, and it's the same sort of equilibrium. Your costs would tend to sort of approach the sort of value of the tokens that you're mining. And so you don't have this sort of concentration effect of the tokens as you do in proof of stake. Some guys get sort of an early large amount, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. They never sell because they never have to. And this obviously it causes price instability as well, but that's a slightly side point. And so what we're having really in the innovation game is there is a sort of, as I said, going to be a requirement for a deposit to be introduced. But the thing is that the distribution of those tokens will be far more kind of wide and fair and market determined than it would be in something like proof of stake, because of this issue of the fact that they're all sold. So people often think, oh, why is proof of stake centralized? Why people say it's centralized and proof of work is decentralized? It's not necessarily because you have sort of lots and lots of miners. That's not really a thing that makes it decentralized. It's really the fact that the token allocation, because most of the tokens have to be sold by the miners to cover their cost, ends up being very spread out. And so we kind of leverage this fact, and even to basically reason that even though the miners now will be incentivized to hold a deposit, the degree of centralization that will cause is very minimal, because the tokens have much better distribution because we are proof of work.
Yeah, understood. I think that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to the rollout of proof of deposit, obviously it's something that's in development right now and has been for some time. But is there an expected timeline here when it comes to the release and when people are going to be required to start doing this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we'll give people at least 1 week's notice. We're not we're exactly sure when we were going to release it now, but as far as we know, it is basically ready. And I'll have to catch up with Ying tomorrow, and he's been doing some sort of last minute testing. But it's sort of this has been ready for some time, and we figured out the details of this for some time ago. And it's always better to do testing, but we're thinking of deploying it quite soon, because of kick ourselves if some kind of botnet got spun up or something. I mean, we're still quite under the radar relatively. Botnets tend to sort of focus on larger protocols, but it's always better to be more secure sooner. So I think pretty soon, like within a week or two, that's what I would estimate, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, yeah, I mean it'll come out. Look, as with anything, it'll come out when it's ready, and not a minute
Indeed.
before then.
Yeah.
Um, now, so we're going to have the initial rollout of this sometime soon, we think. But are there going to be any kinds of updates that happen? Is this going to be like an evolving concept that we consistently tweak as we learn more about it and how it influences participant behavior?
So the only thing, I mean, there will be certain extra features. As I mentioned, a possibility of delegating the deposit. Um, Other than that, I think it should. There aren't really too many sort of parameters involved in it. There is a lot of parameters, as I said before, like what kind of penalty will people get in practice for, say, if they didn't hold any deposit in their account and they were mining. So again, this is a sort of parameter which has to sort of be decided. But it's sort of, yeah, this isn't really an exact science. I would say we're going to make our best guess at an appropriate value. It could be subject to change in the future, but basically, yeah, it's a pretty simple system. I don't think anyone's ever had some kind of hybrid of kind of deposit and what some people might call staking and proof of work in the way that we have implemented it. So that will be particularly interesting. Um, and yeah, additional features. Yeah, the delegating. There might be also a feature whereby people can lock a deposit. So, say if somebody delegated some deposit to you, you might want to have some kind of assurance they weren't just going to take it back again at a moment's notice. Because it's sort of you want sort of stability as a benchmarker. And so I think maybe the kind of functionality to lock deposits, voluntarily for particular amounts of time would also be a natural one.
Yes, excellent. All right, so that's unless anyone has any further questions, that is everything that we have to talk about regarding proof of deposit. We're going to be moving on to the next topic here, something that people have been talking about for quite a long time now, and that's mining pools. Ying has been hinting for some weeks now that he's working on some updates to the protocol that would allow for their implementation. But worth just starting off with the basics, John. What are mining pools and what do they mean for the protocol?
Yeah, so mining pools are a way that really kind of smaller miners, and actually indeed even larger miners, ultimately can reduce the sort of volatility of their returns. So as many people, especially if you look at the innovation game, if you're mining with us will know, is that it's sort of a bit frustrating. Sometimes you'll get lots of solutions, sometimes you'll get many fewer solutions, and this sort of difficulty in kind of balancing and smoothing things out is exacerbated for smaller miners. Because say if you're yeah, I mean it's almost obvious, right? If you're a smaller miner and say you've got sort of three solutions for proof of work number one and three solutions for proof of work number two, and then only one solution for proof of work number three, well, that's actually, it's a huge fluctuation. That means you've got, I don't know, 66% less, let's say 70% less solutions for proof of work number three than you have for proofs of work number one and two. And yet it's a fluctuation that could easily happen. It's only two fewer solutions in an absolute sense. So this can affect you quite badly if you're a smaller miner, but the bigger miners, because they find more solutions, their fluctuations are smaller relative to the kind of total size of what they get. A plus or minus two solutions for them might not be much to be concerned about if they're finding 100 or 200 solutions. It's rather negligible. And so this is an issue which exists not just in the innovation game, it exists in all proof of work protocols, that the smaller miners are kind of subject to this much sort of greater volatility of returns. And it means that it's just, their risk is far greater, of not, getting as many solutions as they thought that they should, just from some kind of random fluctuation. So the solution to this is kind of pooling your compute power. If you join a mining pool, you really can pool it with all the other pool members, and then the sort of mining pool operator really just sort of acts as one single miner, but obviously he's sort of crowdsourcing a lot of this compute from the pool members. So this is something which is known to be very helpful in proof of work cryptocurrencies. In fact, I have a paper which I'll share. I've read this paper a very long time ago, but then I sort of forgot about it, which has a very kind of striking result. And it's that, I mean, they studied Bitcoin specifically, but this will sort of apply to other proofs of work as well. They showed that having mining pools, in fact, can increase the sort of total participation in the network by up to 10 times. So you think about what an enormous effect that is. And I thought, for a while, mining pools are just a bit of they're almost kind of like an optional extra, like a nice to have. But it turns out, in fact, that you have to have them in order to get to be a big, one of the biggest, most competitive proof of work protocols. Because of this risk mitigation effect, it means that all of these smaller miners end up just being crowded out completely. And all the smaller miners add up to a lot of mining power in the end. Except if they get crowded out, in which case maybe they're going to go elsewhere. So mining pools are something, to cut a long story short, that a proof of work protocol has to have. One interesting feature about the innovation game is that it's not ideally set up for mining pools at the moment. So you could set up a mining pool, but it would be more tricky really for the pool operator to run the pool securely. And the reason is quite an easy one to understand. Is that if you're a pool operator, you really want a way that your pool members can prove that they're trying to find solutions. So, by definition, if they're quite small miners who are members of your pool, and that's what mining pools are for, often they'll just be trying and trying. They won't find any solutions. Occasionally they'll get lucky and they'll find one. What you need to know is that they are at least trying, because if they're just sort of sitting there, kind of pretending to be mining and actually they're not, then when somebody in the pool does find a solution, the way these mining pools work is that the sort of revenue is sort of spread between all the pool members. And of course, it would be very unfair and really unviable if some guy who was just claiming he was mining, um, actually wasn't. So the question is like, how would you just prove that you are trying to mine even if you haven't got any solutions? There's quite a natural way to do that in typically in proof of work. What the pool members do is they request sort of lower difficulty hashes from their pool members. These things called hash shares, and they're just basically they found a sort of hash value, but it's not high enough difficulty to win a block in the Bitcoin network, but it is sort of like a reasonably high difficulty. So you can only find these things regularly and dependably if you really are trying to solve the block. And yeah, the things about the innovation game is there's no obvious way to prove that you're trying to find a solution, and so we're going to implement a tweak to the protocol, an upgrade, which means that it will be possible for all miners, benchmarkers to prove that they are trying to find solutions, and therefore mining pools can be much more easily implemented, and smaller miners will be a lot more competitive. That will be the effect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and worth just spelling out as clearly as we can why we want to be doing this. TIG is a protocol with huge ambitions, right? We want to be a truly global protocol. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and we want each and every one of them that have something valuable to add to TIG to be participating. And there are, of course, a number of ways people can do that. They can benchmark, they can innovate, but even if there are a lot of people who can innovate, they are, based on how things presently work, going to be squeezed out by larger miners that come along and consolidate power. But at the end of the day, we do realize that there are many who have something to meaningfully contribute to the way the protocol works. And if those people want to be involved, we want them to be involved. So it's definitely good that we explore any way for more and more people, including smaller entities, to have some skin in the game. This is not a spectator sport. If you want to be involved, we want you to be involved. Now, we've already
Absolutely.
talked.
So that
Sure.
Yeah, there is a certain kind of extent, to some things that happen that it's, maybe the mining just gets so competitive. Maybe you don't have access to cheap enough electricity, and there's some, guys in Kazakhstan are out competing you. That can happen with mining. But what's happening at the moment is it isn't because we've gotten quite there's a lot of compute coming to the network. It isn't really that. A lot of people are finding themselves uncompetitive, but it's not because their compute isn't fast enough or their electricity isn't cheap enough. It's this volatility issue. There's too much volatility for people who find smaller numbers of solutions, and so mining pools will fix that. And yeah, it is yeah, we want everybody who is genuinely kind of competitive, which I think almost all the people on the Discord channel are. And they kind of know this intuitively, and so they're wondering why they're getting fewer rewards. And that's the reason we need to enable mining pools.
Yeah, certainly. And just to sum it up again, so that people have the headline, we think this is going to be positive for TIG because it's going to allow a lot more people to participate. It's going to reduce the volatility of rewards. Is there anything else that I'm missing here?
So ultimately, it enables much larger amounts of compute in total to come to the network. As I said, this paper, which I thought was quite a surprising result, said up to 10 times more if
Wow.
you have mining pools. So it's quite surprising to a lot of people that they are that impactful, because people think they're a sort of detail. They know they exist, but how important are they really? They're very important. And so to be able to scale and remain secure, you have to have them as a proof of work protocol. So very important.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. This would be a good time, since I typically do this in the middle of the call. I think we're about like 2/3 of the way through it, almost getting to the end here. But we're going to do the lottery, as is custom. So I have all of the names that have been written down of everyone who's in the call right now. We have 61 people, some of whom are, of course, team members, so those people have been excluded. So we are going to spin for 2 winners total. Here goes the first one. Nearly there. Congratulations to Mr. Clip. Mr. Clip, you are our first winner this week. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. All right, let me just go ahead and screenshot this here and ensure that it is logged for all to see. Alrighty, Mr. Clip, you are our first winner. Excellent. Okay, on to the next one. So we'll go ahead and remove him and spin for one more. Cool. Okay. Our second winner is ready for it. Anop Cams. Congratulations, Anop Cams. All right. So, of course, as I do every week, these are going to be posted here in the lottery channel, just so that we keep track of that. Yeah, so lottery winners, you know how this works at this point. Please go ahead and DM me, give me your base scan address, and we'll go ahead and get the tokens sent over to you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, one, not a full topic discussion here, but one real quick question, John. And this isn't the first time that I've seen someone ask this, but I wanted to address it. Someone asked recently if specialist hardware such as FPGAs, we've also talked about ASICs, how they fall under this category. They're saying that it's unfair or potentially against the spirit of TIG. I was wondering if you had any comments on that and whether or not that's true.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. The answer is that no, it's not sort of against the spirit of TIG, but I can understand, certainly empathize with the questioner. So I think, I'm not quite sure, but I was just sort of thinking back in my memory why, it might be possible that people will get this impression. I think in the early days, we did a couple of things, sort of released upgrades to the benchmarking software, in fact, where the justification was that this is here to sort of level the playing field. And so I think it would be very reasonable for people to get the impression that we, at the innovation game, desire a level playing field, that we want things to be sort of fair and equal between all people, or benchmarkers. And in fact, our position is a bit more subtle than that. We don't sort of kind of design necessarily fairness for its own sake. So the problem with kind of evenness and fairness, it's on the old kind of communism versus capitalism sort of thing, is that you would sort of reduce the incentive for people who are sort of more competitive to sort of invest more in their sort of hardware and in their kind of in their mining and in anything else. The tricky thing with the innovation game, this goes really right back to the origins and why the innovation game is special, is that it was known for a very long time, obviously, since Bitcoin, that that some miners, of course, are more competitive than others. They managed to negotiate better deals with cheaper electricity. They managed to negotiate cheaper hosting. Maybe they get some sort of bulk discount buying ASICs from Bitmain in China or something like that. And these are all sort of business skills and ways that miners compete with one another. So in that case, it's easy to sort of realize that this is, you might say it's not fair. Maybe somebody was like the cousin of like Jihan Wu or something like that, or somebody, someone's kind of mom worked for the local, hydroelectric power station or something. Of course, that wouldn't be fair, right? But the thing is, it's like, the world isn't fair. Like you get sort of people with sort of various edges. People are kind of, have various advantages. And ultimately, the people who sort of exploit their own sort of advantages and play to their strengths most, end up kind of, winning and getting a larger share of the pie. And this is all sort of, capitalism, and this is fine. And this is kind of often what drives innovation. The problem was, and the reason why proof of work never featured optimizable algorithms before, algorithms that you could make better, is because the advantage that you could potentially get by finding a better algorithm was so extreme that it would just crush all of your competition. So this is going to the kind of complete other end of the scale. Like we do like capitalism, we do like competition, we do like the innovation that it drives. But if you get an extreme version of it, say like, I don't know, Standard Oil in the early 1900s, what they did is they just destroyed all of the other competition. And then there was no innovation because there were no other businesses, right? They were so powerful that they kind of leveraged and exploited. So it's like the thing that always kept algorithms out of this proof of work mechanism that people use to secure blockchains because of the potentially very extreme effect of having a better algorithm. You could maybe get 100x advantage without, even having to buy more hardware, without even having to spend anything more on electricity. In fact, you'd be spending less on electricity because your hardware was because your algorithm was more efficient. And so, what we need to do in the innovation game is not. We probably should never have said this thing or kind of level the playing field, but what we need to do is limit the advantage from this very, very extreme factor, which is the algorithms. And that's the reason why the innovation game is designed so that you have to sort of share your algorithm in order to be able to benchmark it, for example. Um, and so this is the kind of, it's an important factor. We want people to sort of be able to differentiate, according to their skill. Maybe they have access to better hardware. Maybe they know how to configure FPGAs, which not everybody does. We encourage that. And also, out of this, we get something which is very important, which is a market signal as to what is the best algorithm, taking into account hardware differences. So if everybody was forced to use the same hardware, I mean, of course, this wouldn't be realistic because people around the world don't use the same hardware. But also, you get this kind of strange effect whereby people say, "Oh, my algorithm is better." And people say, "Oh, well, it's better if you run it on hardware A than if you run it on hardware B." So is it really better anymore? So if it's better, much more efficient, but only if it's run on hardware A. But then what if hardware A is, very hard to obtain or extremely expensive? Like, is the algorithm really better anymore? And the question which only a market can figure out. Because if an algorithm is more efficient, but on a piece of hardware which sort of, doesn't exist and is prohibitively expensive, then it's not practically of as much value to the world. This is something that, permitting people to use different types of hardware, and then we just look at which algorithm is being used by most people. That takes into account the availability of the hardware and all sorts of things such as expense or difficulty to set up the hardware. And so it is in fact an integral part of the innovation game. But I think to cut a long story short, I can understand why people might have thought that it was not, that our objective was sort of fairness and keeping things level. In fact, it's not. It's just keeping things level enough to not cause the security of the protocol to be compromised.
Yeah, yeah, totally understandable. Yeah, thank you for explaining all of that. Just making sure that we're keeping things moving along here. We have two final topics to discuss, both of them related to some of the challenges that we have on offer, as well as some that we're going to be introducing. So, one thing that's been discussed recently is there's going to be an update to the knapsack problem. I wanted to go over what that will consist of, why we're doing it, and what is the upshot for the various benchmarkers and innovators that are involved in interacting with it. So, yeah, to start, John, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the innovation game started off with three challenges already in place. And, we wanted those three challenges to be sort of interesting, real things, not just sort of fake mathematical contrivances. Um, uh, but we also, because we were just starting off, and this is a highly experimental thing, as I said, no one's ever launched a proof of work protocol with optimizable proof of work before. We wanted the challenges to be sort of simple enough to, we could be sure that they were kind of reasonably sort of secure. They didn't have any kind of backdoors to them or some secret ways to cheat. So we went for kind of this sort of simplicity implementation for those first three kind of seed challenges, as we call them, really just to prove out the optimizable proof of work concept, not so much to sort of focus on securing valuable IP, which is something obviously which is necessary, but comes a bit later after we've proven the security of the system. So in the case of the knapsack problem, because there are several versions of the knapsack problem, and this is really the simplest one. But also being the simplest one is it's a bit too simple in some circumstances to be, it's not necessarily the most kind of valuable one. Also, the algorithms which are the best at solving it tend to be ones which are sort of relatively kind of straightforward. So the kind of innovation that we're incentivizing there is, towards algorithms which are like reasonably already quite well understood and well optimized. So the motivation is that you kind of increase the sort of complexity of the problem somewhat. It's still sort of a knapsack problem, but it's a slightly more elaborate version of it. And we can go into the kind of applications that the new knapsack problem has, which the old one sort of didn't have. But sort of ultimately, it's that we're making the problem a bit more sort of elaborate and a bit closer. Really a bit closer, but actually coincident with something which is known to be sort of valuable. Kind of there's practical demand for it in everyday life. Yeah, we don't sort of spring this on people too much because people worked hard on knapsack algorithms to find a sort of an advanced implementation of it. It's really because it was the seed, one of those three seed problems that we are going to tweak it a bit because we were just focused on sort of simplicity and sort of minimizing the attack surface for the three seed problems. So this will happen with knapsack. May happen with SAT and capacitated vehicle routing. Actually, my hunch is that it will not happen with SAT, in fact, because SAT, even though it is incredibly simple, the version that we have, it is um, coincident with something which is people work a lot on in practical applications. The capacitated vehicle routing one sort of maybe not so much, so that might be tweaked as well. But that's really the motivation for it. They were started off as kind of seed problems when we weren't so much focused on sort of practical utility and harvesting the IP. It was more just sort of proving that the concept of TIG did in fact make sense and could be run in practice.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely an important thing to adjust, seeing that the one of the key value proposals of the protocol is producing useful IP. I mean, if we were just sitting here optimizing for the for the solving of totally arbitrary problems, then it wouldn't be hugely useful outside of the like very particular spaces where those algorithms are useful. Sorry. So yeah, you mentioned that
Absolutely right. So this is what traditional proof of work does. It kind of solves for kind of completely arbitrary problems. And those arbitrary problems are non-optimizable. So our first step was to solve for problems. Well, they weren't completely arbitrary, but there's this sort of element of sort of arbitrariness in the knapsack one. It was very simple, but it was optimizable. And this you really have to see is that's a huge technological leap. So the optimizable proof of work was believed impossible before. So we proved that to some extent. It seems to be working so far, so good. And then we move on to the next stage, which is very necessary because the reason why we wanted optimizable algorithms to be viable is because we wanted to gather valuable IP for it.
right, and excuse me, you mentioned that you mentioned some other of the different challenges while we've been talking about this. Is this something that we can regularly expect? Is every challenge going to be modified at some point during its lifetime, or is this just going to be done on a as needed basis, like you were saying? Some of the excuse me, challenges that we've introduced at the beginning, they were more of a proof of concept kind of thing. Now they're being upgraded so that we move past that. But is this going to be something that is regularly a part of the, I guess, path to maturity for a particular challenge, or is it just going to be purely on an as needed basis?
So yeah, it's a great question. I would say it shouldn't be a regular thing. It should be that the challenge is designed initially so that it is, a kind of sufficiently sort of elaborate and close to the most interesting one for real world applications. That then it's just done. But certainly, I do anticipate maybe at least in the early stages of the protocol, we might have some learning to do, and we might sort of not quite hit the mark until we sort of really sort of hit our stride. But the aim is, after we're kind of cleaning out the cobwebs, as it were, and testing these mechanisms, then it shouldn't be necessary anymore. But you never know. People kind of miss things, and things are realized sometimes a little bit late. So yeah, it is a possibility, but it shouldn't be part of the protocol ongoing, or at least aim to minimize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you for outlining all of that for us. Now, the fifth and final topic, right, is going to be hypergraph partitioning. This is something that we've brought up over and over again, but I do want to give people an update of where we're at on it. But before we do that, John, if you could just start by reminding us what is the hypergraph partitioning challenge and who's been working on it / suggesting it.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think I've been asked this question before, and I think I think I tried to explain it the first time, and then I refrained the second time. The problem is because it's really easy to explain, but only if you've got a diagram. If you try and explain it but verbally, it becomes a bit incredibly
It's one of
confusing.
those.
But I will say it's a bit like a graph. Like I don't know if people know what a graph is in the mathematical context. It's like you have these things called vertices. They're just points, and the points are joined with lines. And a hypergraph is really a generalization of that. So rather than an edge, which is just like a line joining two points, an edge can be like a subset. So it's like a sort of circle around several points. But this it sounds really confusing, but it's actually really easy to understand it if you're looking at a diagram. We might just have to sort of push people off to the old kind of written and drawn explanation of it. But again, this sounds like quite an abstract problem, and it is. It's been studied just on its own in the abstract for a very long time. It has relatively recently found application in parallel computing. So what they realized is in order to make parallel computing clusters run most efficiently, you have to solve the hypergraph partitioning problem repeatedly. So that's the sort of way to kind of tie it to the real world. But the problem itself is like very kind of abstract and mathematical, and that's just one of its important applications. And this is very much used in AI, for example, because they're very keen to optimize parallel computing runs in AI because they're so expensive, and even like relatively small optimizations to the way that the computers use resources can save huge amounts of money. So this challenge was suggested by a professor of computer science at Imperial College London. One of his PhD students, in fact, is sort of struggling, trying to find a better way to do this at the moment. So that was really the kind of origin of where this challenge came from.
Yeah, thank you for recapping that yet again, John. It may stink having to answer it for like the third time, but we do have new people, constantly pouring into the server who might not have seen some of the previous community calls. So I did
Oh
think
yeah,
it was worth
absolutely.
noting.
I was just didn't want to launch into some kind of garbled explanations. I think I did the very first time, and then I regretted it.
Yeah, yeah, understandable. But no, I think you've got it down by now after the amount of practice that we've done. Yeah, so final thing on that is when do we anticipate introducing that? Is it ready sometime soon, or is it something that we're going to be discussing three
So
more times
I
before it's
believe that
implemented?
it's ready to go. Yeah, the only thing we're kind of holding back on is, as we said, we've got a few things we're looking to introduce. One is proof of deposit, another one's enabling mining pools, and obviously another challenge would is also kind of highly desirable. But yeah, we're just looking to sort of think as to what strong reasons there are to introduce these in a particular order. We certainly wouldn't want to do it all at the same time because then there's kind of more things to sort of watch maybe. And when new things can sometimes cause some sort of unexpected issues. So we're going to sort of introduce these things sequentially, but as to what order, that's to be confirmed.
Yeah, excellent. All right, that wraps up everything we have written down for today. And I'm glad someone's asking this because it's something that I thought about while we were talking about it, and then I forgot to ask you. But we do have a question from Rare Fish here in the chat. He's asking, what is the cutoff for maximum amount of deposit to where it no longer benefits you anymore? And I guess to follow on to that, like, is it just going to, are we just going to posit that, okay, if you've deposited a certain amount of TIG tokens, we get rid of the penalty, or does the penalty scale with the amount of tokens you have deposited? Would be great to give people some insight into how this is going to work.
Yeah, that's great. So again, this hasn't been absolutely finalized yet. I mean, I think that the cutoff, which I sort of favor for various reasons, we can justify this when we actually we're going to publish a sort of written account of how it's going to work before actually implementing it. But I would say it's in the region of about 20%. So if you had sort of 20%, if you had 5% of the compute and you had 6% of the deposit, then maybe it would sort of that deposit would kind of additional deposit might benefit you to some small extent, sort of decreasing diminishing returns. But anything beyond that, if it's 20% cut off, would just be completely ignored for the sake of the protocol. It'd be just almost as if you didn't have it. So yeah, that would be the kind of ballpark area that we would be looking at.
Excellent. All right. Before we all log off for the day, I will put out one more call for any additional questions that people might have. Get them in quickly because we're already. I said this would be short, and we're already at the 50-minute mark. But yeah, if anyone has anything additional to ask, please go ahead now. If not, forever hold your peace, and we're all going to go home. Yeah, I don't see anyone typing, so. All right. Well, that's another successful community call. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Of course, as per usual, this is going to be uploaded. It might take a second because I have to tweak the audio, and my audio tech is out of town. But thankfully, I've slowly been learning how to do this myself so that we can eliminate the amount of things that need to be done in order to get the upload finished. Also worth noting that in the future, if we think it's a good idea, I still need to talk to some people and see what they think. Maybe you guys can give me some input on this yourselves. One of the ways to get the call uploaded a lot quicker is if we do this on a platform that automatically records the calls and has a studio element that allows you to sort out all of the different like volume differences from different speakers, all the differences in microphone quality. So we could do this on YouTube and stream it there. Obviously, that means that it's not going to be conducted within the Discord. So there are some concerns around that. But yeah, do please let me know if you have any input on there. I don't want to do it on Twitch for various reasons, but if someone can sway me there, maybe I'll consider it. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, John.
So everybody, bye.